Iran war breakthrough. Pakistan reports significant progress after emergency Tehran talks. Could the Iran war be nearing an end? Pakistan says it has made significant progress in high-level talks with Iran aimed at stopping further escalation, reviving negotiations with the United States, and reopening the Strait of Hormuz. The announcement is one of the strongest diplomatic signals in weeks that the 6-month confrontation could again be moving towards negotiation, rather than an expanding military and economic struggle. But this is not a peace agreement yet. Pakistan has not disclosed what concessions were discussed. Iran has not publicly agreed to reopen Hormuz unconditionally, and Washington has not announced that it is returning to the previous settlement framework. What has changed is the tone. And, in a conflict where the central diplomatic process had largely stalled, that matters. Pakistan's Tehran mission produces a rare optimistic signal. Pakistan's Chief of Defense Forces and Army Chief Field Marshal, Syed Asim Munir, traveled to Tehran alongside Interior Minister Mohsin Naqvi for meetings with senior Iranian leaders, including President Masoud Pezeshkian. Naqvi said the meeting with Pezeshkian had been very positive and productive, and that significant progress had been made. According to Pakistan's official account, discussions covered the Iran-US conflict, wider Middle East tensions, the route back towards negotiations and steps needed to restore the Islamabad Memorandum of Understanding. Pakistan's military said discussions also centered on preventing further escalation, reopening the Strait of Hormuz, accelerating an end to the conflict, and reaching a negotiated settlement. That combination is important. Islamabad is not treating Hormuz as a separate maritime dispute. It increasingly appears to regard an agreement over the strait as the mechanism capable of unlocking the much larger political settlement. Iranian officials have also offered positive signals. A senior official in the Iranian president's office described Munir's visit as highly productive and said it had produced diplomatic achievements whose results could become clearer soon. The obvious caution is that neither government has explained exactly what those achievements are. Significant progress can describe anything from agreement on principles to meaningful movement on specific concessions. Until the parties disclose terms or take visible steps, such as restoring negotiations, altering military deployments, or establishing a reliable commercial shipping arrangement, the breakthrough remains diplomatic rather than operational. Hormuz is once again the key to the entire conflict. The Strait of Hormuz has increasingly become the conflict's central bargaining point. Before the war transformed the Gulf shipping environment, roughly 20 million barrels of petroleum liquids passed through the strait each day. U.S. Energy Information Administration data shows total oil flows subsequently collapsed from 21.6 million barrels per day in the final quarter of 2025 to just 4.9 million barrels per day to just 4.9 million barrels. Hormuz is not merely a narrow maritime passage between Iran and Oman. It is one of the structural arteries of the world energy system, linking Gulf producers with major customers across Asia and beyond. Before the present disruption, around 1/5 of global petroleum consumption passed through the strait, while more than 1/5 of global LNG trade also depended on it. There are pipelines capable of bypassing Hormuz, but their spare capacity can replace only part of the enormous volumes normally carried by ships through the waterway. That makes reopening Hormuz valuable to almost everyone involved, but for different reasons. The United States wants reliable freedom of navigation and to demonstrate that Iran cannot permanently threaten the world economy through the strait. Gulf exporters need predictable shipping. Energy importing states want lower transport risk and greater supply security. Iran, however, also knows that instability at Hormuz gives it leverage. That is why the fundamental issue is not simply whether ships can physically cross. The harder question is what political, military, and economic settlement Iran receives before normal navigation is restored. The previous peace framework already showed how this could work. There is a framework to return to. Pakistan and Qatar previously helped establish a diplomatic process under the Islamabad Memorandum of Understanding, followed by high-level and technical negotiations in Switzerland. A Pakistan-Qatar joint statement issued in June said the parties had agreed on a roadmap towards a final deal and created a communication line designed to prevent incidents and miscalculation, while supporting safe passage for commercial vessels through Hormuz. Pakistan later described resolving the Hormuz standoff as essential to restarting the wider process. Its foreign ministry said earlier this month that an agreement over the strait could create conditions for the parties to return to the Islamabad MoU and restart technical-level negotiations between Iran and the United States. That makes the latest Tehran mission more consequential than an isolated diplomatic visit. Pakistan appears to be trying to restore a mechanism that already exists, rather than invent an entirely new peace architecture. The broader Iran war has repeatedly moved between military escalation and fragile attempts at negotiation. Each previous attempt has foundered on the same fundamental problem. Neither Washington nor Tehran wants to surrender its strongest source of leverage before receiving guarantees from the other side. Hormuz has therefore become both the problem and potentially the solution. Pakistan is becoming more important than its formal role suggests. Pakistan occupies an unusual position. It maintains relations with Iran while also retaining significant diplomatic and military links with the United States and Gulf Arab governments. That gives Islamabad something increasingly rare in the confrontation: access. Pakistan's foreign ministry has repeatedly described itself as a facilitator and mediator, working alongside states, including Qatar and Oman. Islamabad says it has continued direct and indirect engagement even when the formal negotiation process stalled. Munir's involvement adds another dimension. This is no longer diplomacy conducted exclusively between foreign ministries. Pakistan's most powerful military figure is directly engaging Iran's political and security leadership, potentially giving Islamabad a route into the part of the Iranian system capable of approving or blocking security concessions. Munir had also spoken with U.S. President Donald Trump before traveling to Tehran, strengthening the impression that Pakistan is attempting to act as a bridge between two governments that are still unwilling or unable to negotiate normally with one another. That does not mean Islamabad can dictate an agreement, but it may be able to perform the harder intermediary role, identifying concessions each side might accept without requiring either side to publicly move first. Trump is applying maximum economic pressure at the same time. The diplomatic optimism is arriving alongside a major escalation in American economic pressure. On August 24th, the Trump administration announced Operation Economic Outcast, a new campaign designed to isolate Iran economically and increase secondary sanctions, risks for companies and countries continuing to conduct business with Tehran. The U.S. Treasury said the campaign expands pressure across areas including shipping, technology, gold, aviation, and digital assets. The administration says its goal is to cut Iran off from the international economic networks sustaining the government. That creates a striking contradiction. Pakistan is trying to persuade Tehran that compromise can produce a viable settlement, while Washington is simultaneously demonstrating the economic price of refusing one. That may be deliberate. The Trump administration appears to believe military and financial pressure can weaken Tehran's bargaining position sufficiently to make diplomacy more productive. But coercion can work in the opposite direction too. Iranian leaders may conclude that agreeing under escalating pressure would look like capitulation, particularly if Washington demands concessions before offering sanctions relief or security guarantees. Pakistan therefore has to bridge not merely two negotiating positions but two incompatible political narratives. Washington needs any eventual agreement to look like pressure worked. Tehran needs it to look like resistance secured acceptable terms. That is where mediation becomes difficult. A Hormuz agreement could have immediate global consequences. If the talks produce a credible reopening mechanism for Hormuz, the effects could extend far beyond the Gulf. Energy markets have already demonstrated how sensitive they are to changes in shipping conditions. The U.S. Energy Information Administration estimates that disruption through Hormuz has contributed to major global inventory draws and elevated crude prices. Its August outlook forecasts Brent crude averaging roughly $85 per barrel during the third quarter of 2026, before potentially falling as traffic through Hormuz increases and disrupted production returns. A durable shipping agreement could therefore remove part of the geopolitical premium embedded in oil prices, encourage more tankers back into Gulf routes, and allow previously constrained production to return. But the word durable matters. A strait that can technically be crossed while commercial operators fear attack, seizure, or sudden closure is not the same thing as a normal international shipping corridor. Tuesday offered an uncomfortable reminder. An oil tanker near the Strait of Hormuz was disabled after being struck by an unidentified projectile, although its crew were reported unharmed. The attack underlined the gap between diplomatic progress in Tehran and continued physical danger at sea. Any successful agreement, therefore, needs more than political language. Shipping companies, insurers, and crews have to believe it will hold. What could happen next? The first thing to watch is whether Pakistan's claim of significant progress produces something measurable. That could mean a formal announcement concerning Hormuz, the restoration of technical negotiations, new security arrangements for commercial vessels, or an agreement to reactivate parts of the Islamabad framework. The second test will come from Washington. So far, the Trump administration's most visible move has been greater economic pressure, not a public offer of concessions. If Islamabad has persuaded Iran to soften its position, the critical question becomes whether the United States believes that movement is sufficient to justify reciprocal steps. Iran's response will matter just as much. Tehran would have to determine whether reopening Hormuz removes its strongest bargaining weapon, or whether reopening it under negotiated conditions could itself become the first payment in a wider settlement. Pakistan's announcement is therefore important precisely because it should not yet be mistaken for peace. No final agreement has been announced. No unconditional reopening of the Strait of Hormuz has been confirmed. No comprehensive settlement ending the war has been published. But after months in which Hormuz shifted from global energy artery to military pressure point, Pakistan is claiming that discussions have moved materially forward, and Iran's presidency is publicly signaling that the mission produced diplomatic achievements of its own. If those statements are followed by concrete action, the Tehran meetings of August 24 could eventually be remembered as the moment the conflict began moving towards an exit. If they are not, the same narrow waterway that has repeatedly pulled the world economy into the confrontation remains capable of dragging the diplomacy back towards war.